He was old enough to know better. She was young enough to lose everything with one wrong choice. Hot summer afternoon by the Yellowstone River, Montana. June 1889. Sarah Bennett, 22 years old, hands gripping tight onto a large boulder, one leg propped up on the smooth stone. Behind her, Jake Lister, 48, held her waist firm, sweat dripping under the scorching sun. Sarah's white wedding dress lay scattered by the riverbank, torn to shreds, covered in trail dust. They didn't speak, just heavy breaths and pounding hearts. Fear and want tangled up so tight they felt the same. Sarah tilted her head back, lips trembling. "Jake," she whispered, voice breaking. "Don't send me back to him. Don't leave me." Jake tightened his grip, eyes shut tight, trying to control the trembling in his body. This wasn't something a 48-year-old man should be doing with a young woman running from a forced wedding. But when Sarah turned and looked at him with those pleading eyes, he couldn't resist. 5 minutes earlier, Jake had been pacing back and forth trying to convince Sarah to go back to town. "You're too young. I can't take advantage of you." But Sarah had walked to that boulder, propped her leg up, and looked back at him. "Do it now, Jake. If you're going to save me, then save me. I can't go back there. I can't take it anymore." Now, under the blazing sun, they'd crossed a line there was no coming back from. On that hot stretch of riverbank, they gave themselves to each other like there might not be a tomorrow. Crossing a line no preacher could ever erase when it was over. Sarah sagged against the warm stone, chest heaving, while Jake turned away, hands shaking as the weight of what they'd done crashed down on him. "God, forgive me." Sarah slowly stood up, legs trembling, pulling her dress to cover herself. She walked over, placed her hand on Jake's shoulder. "Don't regret this. I wanted it. I wanted you." Jake turned around, looking into her blue eyes. "Sarah, if they find you, if your father finds out about this, then we run. We disappear." Jake sighed, brushing Sarah's hair from her face. "I'll protect you no matter who I have to face." They sat by the riverbank, Sarah resting her head on Jake's shoulder. Jake stared toward Billings, where the town was surely in chaos over the missing bride. Clayton Hartwell, that rich, ruthless 50-year-old bastard, would never let Sarah go. And Judge Bennett, Sarah's father, the man Jake had saved 5 years ago, would never forgive Jake if he found out Sarah belonged to Jake. And Jake would have to face the consequences. 3 months later, at the Lister ranch, Sarah stood before the mirror, hand trembling as she touched her belly. "Sarah, you all right?" Sarah turned around, tears streaming down. "Jake, I'm pregnant." Jake stood frozen like he'd been struck by lightning. "Doc says I'm close to 3 months along." A stranger stood at the ranch gate, staring hard at Sarah through the window. Ernest Cole, Clayton Hartwell's hired gun. Jake grabbed his revolver, turned to Sarah. "Pack your things. We're leaving tonight." But it was too late. Gunshots rang out. Window glass shattered. 6 riders surrounded the ranch. Clayton Hartwell sitting on his horse, grinning cold. "Jake Lister, hand over my bride or die?" Could Jake protect the woman carrying his child from the most ruthless land baron in Montana? Or would it all end tonight? Jake didn't hesitate. He yanked his old Winchester .73 to his shoulder, the brass cartridges glinting in the broken light, and fired 2 quick shots through the shattered window. One of Clayton's men pitched out of the saddle and hit the dirt hard. Another grabbed his arm and howled as a bullet tore through muscle. The others scattered, taking cover behind the fence. Clayton sat calm on his black stallion, that smug grin still plastered on his face. "You can't run forever, Lister. She's mine by law." Jake turned to Sarah, grabbed her hand. "The cellar now." They ran through the kitchen. Jake pulled up the trapdoor hidden under the rug. A dark tunnel built years ago for storing whiskey during dry spells. Sarah climbed down first. Jake following, pulling the door shut just as bullets tore through the front entrance. Daniel and Miguel, Jake's ranch hands, both Civil War veterans, returned fire from the second-floor windows. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Clayton's men were dead, 3 wounded. Clayton himself had retreated, but his voice echoed across the property. "I'll be back with the law, Mal Lister. Enjoy your last night of freedom." In the cellar, Sarah sat on an old crate, shaking. Jake lit a lantern, knelt beside her. "We need to leave Montana, head to Fort Ellis. My old army buddy's there." Sarah looked up, tears in her eyes. "My father, Jake. Clayton has him. I heard rumors in town 3 weeks ago. Father's been bedridden. Can't even walk." Jake's jaw tightened. He'd heard the same whispers when he went to Billings for supplies last month. Judge Bennett, once a strong man who could write for hours, now couldn't leave his bed. Jake remembered old Doc Wilson pulling him aside at the general store. "Between you and me, Jake, I think someone's poisoning the judge, but Clayton controls everything now." The sheriff to the mayor. "I can't say nothing." But now, with Sarah carrying his child and Clayton hunting them down, the pieces fell into place. Sarah grabbed Jake's arm. "We have to save him. He's all I have left." Jake shook his head. "If we go back, Clayton will hang me and drag you to the altar." "Then what do we do?" "Just run and let my father die." Before Jake could answer, footsteps above. Miguel's voice came through the floorboards. "Boss, they're gone." But Ernest left something. They climbed back up. On the kitchen table lay a leather journal dropped in the chaos. Jake opened it, his eyes widening, pages of records, dates, names, amounts. Clayton had been embezzling federal land grants, $75,000, forging Judge Bennett's signature on deeds, and a list of 4 other ranchers who mysteriously died in the past 2 years, all poisoned. Sarah read over Jake's shoulder, her hand covering her mouth. "He's been planning this for years." Jake closed the journal, looked at Miguel and Daniel. "We're not running. We're going to war." But first, they needed to get this evidence to someone Clayton couldn't buy. Someone who'd make sure that bastard faced a firing squad. The question was, could they reach Fort Ellis before Clayton's men tracked them down through 90 miles of hostile territory? They left before dawn. Jake, Sarah, Miguel, and Daniel. 4 horses loaded with supplies and that damning journal tucked in Jake's saddlebag. Their plan was simple. Ride hard through the Bridger Range. Void the main trails. Reach Fort Ellis in 3 days. By noon on the first day, they spotted riders on the ridge behind them. 5 men, maybe 6, moving fast. By nightfall, they'd holed up in an abandoned trapper cabin high in the mountains. Jake knelt beside Sarah, gave her water from his canteen. "We're halfway there. You're doing great. Tell me we're going to make it, Jake." "We will. I promise." But Jake knew promises didn't stop bullets. Around midnight, Miguel burst through the door. "They found us. Get coming up the east trail." Jake grabbed his rifle, checked the ammunition. 12 rounds. Daniel had a shotgun, 8 shells. Miguel, a revolver, 6 bullets against 6 trained killers with repeating rifles. Jake positioned them at the windows, blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed the cabin. Gunfire erupted from 3 sides. Bullets splintering the old wood walls. Jake returned fire. Saw 1 man drop in the trees. Daniel's shotgun roared and another scream in the darkness, but they were surrounded, pinned down. Then Miguel shouted from the back window. "There's a ravine 30 yards behind us. We can make it." Jake looked at Sarah. She nodded determined despite the terror in her eyes. "On my signal, we run. Don't stop for anything." He fired 3 quick shots, creating cover. Now they burst out the back door, sprinting through brush and rocks. Bullets whizzed past, one clipping Daniel's shoulder. He stumbled but kept running. They slid down into the ravine just as the cabin erupted in flames. Clayton's men had torched it. Daniel's wound wasn't deep. Miguel wrapped it tight with torncloth. Jake checked the saddlebag. The journal was still there. Thank God. Jake knew they couldn't outrun them forever. Not with Sarah slowing them down. Not with limited ammunition. By sunrise, they spotted something that changed everything. A U.S. cavalry patrol. 20 soldiers heading south from Fort Ellis. They wore the dust and blue of men who'd been in the saddle for days. Sent out from Fort Ellis after reports of stolen horses and Indian trouble along that very trail. But riding at the front of that patrol was someone Jake recognized. Lieutenant William Price, Clayton Hartwell's cousin. Now folks, if you're enjoying this wild ride through the Old West, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Now, here's the million-dollar question. Was that cavalry patrol their salvation, or had Jake just led Sarah straight into Clayton's trap? Jake made a split-second decision. He stepped out from behind the rocks, hands raised, rifle on the ground. Lieutenant Price, need to speak with you. It's urgent. The patrol stopped. Price, a clean-cut officer in his 30s, squinted at Jake. Mel Lister, what the hell are you doing out here? Running for my life. And I got evidence your cousin's a murderer. Price's face went cold. He dismounted, walked closer. Choose your next words carefully. Old man. Jake pulled out the journal, tossed it at Price's feet. $75,000 in stolen federal funds. For ranchers poisoned. Judge Bennett being killed slowly. All your cousin's handiwork. Price picked up the journal. Flipped through pages, his expression darkening with each entry. Behind the rocks, Sarah held her breath. Miguel had his hand on his revolver. Ready? Price looked up at Jake. Where'd you get this? Clayton's men dropped it when they attacked my ranch last night. That journal's his death warrant if it reaches the right people. Price stared at Jake for a long moment. Jaw working. You realize, he said quietly. If this is some kind of trick, I'll see you shot for it myself. If it was a trick, Jake answered, I wouldn't bring my woman and my hands out in front of 20 rifles. Check the names. You know half those ranchers. They're all dead now. Price looked back down at the pages, then snapped the journal shut. This is enough to get a federal marshal's attention, he muttered. I can't hang my own kin on my word alone, but Washington can. He turned to his sergeant. Sergeant Davis, take 10 men. Ride to Billings. Put Clayton Hartwell in irons under authority of the United States Marshal. No special treatment. The Marshal can read this ledger himself when he arrives. The sergeant saluted. Rode off with half the patrol. Price looked back at Jake. I never liked Clayton. Always knew something was off, but he's family. My mother's sister's boy. This is going to tear the family apart. Jake nodded. Sometimes family's the worst poison there is. Price called out. Whoever's hiding behind those rocks, come out. You're under Army protection now. Sarah emerged first, then Miguel and Daniel. Price's eyes widened when he saw Sarah's condition. Ma'am, you need medical attention. Sarah shook her head. I need to see my father first. Judge Bennett in Billings. Clayton's been poisoning him. Price assigned 4 soldiers to escort them back to Billings. Sergeant Davis had already arrested Clayton at the Hartwell estate. The bastard was locked in the town jail, screaming about false charges and demanding lawyers. Jake and Sarah went straight to the Bennett mansion. Judge Bennett lay in bed, pale, thin, barely conscious. Doc Wilson was there, finally able to treat him properly now that Clayton's grip was broken. Out in the hall a little later, Doc Wilson pulled Jake aside. He'll live, the old doctor said. And he'll walk again in time. But he'll never be the man he was in the saddle. Long rides are behind him now. Jake. Poison takes its toll. Sarah knelt by her father's bedside. Tears streaming. Papa, it's me. Sarah, I'm here. The judge's eyes fluttered open, struggled to focus. Sarah, my little girl. Yes, Papa. I'm safe now. His eyes shifted to Jake standing in the doorway. Recognition flickered, then confusion. Now Lister, what? What's going on? Sarah took a deep breath. Papa, I have something to tell you about Jake and me. About what happened 3 months ago. The judge's face turned from confusion to growing anger as Sarah explained everything. The escape, the river, the pregnancy. Judge Bennett stared at Jake with a look that could kill you. You took advantage of my daughter. Jake stepped forward. No, sir. I love her and I'm going to marry her with or without your blessing. The judge's hand trembled as he pointed at the door. Get out. Get out of my house. Sarah grabbed her father's hand. Papa, please. Judge Bennett stared at Jake for what felt like an eternity. Then something unexpected happened. The old man's anger melted into exhaustion. Sarah, help me sit up. Sarah and Doc Wilson propped pillows behind him. The judge looked at his daughter. Really looked at her. Saw the glow in her cheeks despite everything. Saw how she glanced at Jake with absolute trust. You love him truly more than anything, Papa? The judge turned to Jake. 5 years ago when my horse threw me near Crow Creek. You carried me 2 miles to Doc Wilson. Never asked for payment, never wanted recognition. Jake nodded. Any decent man would have done the same, sir. But you're not just any man, are you, Mal Lister? You risked your life to protect my daughter from Clayton. You brought me evidence that would have been easier to burn and run. The judge extended a trembling hand. I may not like how this started, but I can't argue with a man who proves his character when it matters most. Jake shook his hand, felt the weak grip of a poisoned man fighting to stay alive. I'll take care of them both, sir. You have my word. 3 months later, spring 1890, Clayton Hartwell was found guilty on all counts. Federal embezzlement, for counts of murder by poison, attempted murder of Judge Bennett, sentenced to hang. Jake, meanwhile, was at his ranch, finishing the new nursery. Judge Bennett, much recovered after months of treatment, sat in a rocking chair on the porch instead of a saddle. You're putting the crib by the window. Sarah wants the baby to see the sunrise. The judge smiled. She always loved sunrises, even as a little girl. Sarah wore a dress her mother had worn 30 years earlier, altered for her swollen belly. Judge Bennett walked her down the aisle, gave her away with tears in his eyes. Take care of my little girl. Jake. Every day of my life, sir. When Jake kissed Sarah, the crowd cheered. 2 months later, on a warm June morning, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Jake held his daughter for the first time, standing on the porch at dawn. Sarah beside him. You know what this little girl represents? Sarah leaned against him. What's that? Proof that love's stronger than rules. That doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. Jake looked out at the land, the horses grazing, the life they'd built together. Clayton had money, power, connections, but he lost everything because he forgot one simple truth. What truth? That you can't force love. You can't buy respect, and you sure as hell can't poison your way to happiness. Sarah kissed his cheek. You gave me a life I never dared dream of. Jake Mal Lister. Jake smiled, eyes on the horizon. And you gave me a reason to keep fighting, darling. Now, folks, here's what I want you to think about. How many times in life do we hesitate when we ought to act? How many times do we let fear stop us from protecting what matters most? Jake was twice Sarah's age. He could have walked away, could have played it safe, but he didn't. He chose love over fear, action over comfort. And that choice made on a hot afternoon by the Yellowstone River changed 2 lives forever. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is trust his heart when the whole world says he's wrong. Well fellas, sometimes in life a man's got to draw a line in the dirt. Jake drew his by that riverbank. Question is, when your time comes, where are you going to stand? If this story hit you in the gut, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a buddy who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me what time it is where you're watching from. I read every single one. Remember, life's too short for regrets. Make your move. Take your stand.